The night the tree wept blood, the air smelt of gunpowder and rain. My master's screams echoed through the same woods where I once hung in chains, beaten until I forgot my own name. That tree had tasted my skin before, but tonight it would taste his. The whip cracked like thunder, and with every strike, I felt years of pain burning away. By dawn, the master of Arkansas would finally learn what mercy never meant. My name is Nathaniel. I was born on the edge of a cotton plantation near the Arkansas River, where the earth was red as rust and the nights sang with the sound of the whip. I never knew my mother's fate. They said she died giving birth to me under the magnolia trees, the same trees that would later watch me bleed. The only memory I had of her was a faded cloth she once wore around her head, blue with white stars, tucked in my pocket like a prayer no one could steal. The man who owned us was called Master Caldwell, a name that carried the same weight as a curse. He was tall, clean-shaven, and cruel in silence. He didn't need to shout to make men tremble. His eyes did the talking. Every morning, before the sun rose, he'd stand on the porch with a cup of bourbon and point with his cane to whoever would take the lash that day. Sometimes it was for the smallest thing, a broken tool, a misstep, a cough during hymn time. Sometimes it was for no reason at all. The overseer, Mr. Pike, was worse. A devil dressed in rags, with breath that reeked of tobacco and teeth yellow as old parchment. He was the one who taught me what pain could sound like when it broke inside a man's throat. When I turned 12, he called me Quick Hands and put me in charge of brushing the master's boots. By 14, I was the one to saddle his horse. By 15, I learned what it meant to clean blood off leather. I remember one Christmas, the only night they allowed music. The others danced in the quarters, and I sat by the fence, watching the fireflies. The stars above were cold and far away. That night, the master's wife, Mistress Evelyn, walked out in her silk gown, holding a lantern. She was the only one who ever looked at me without disgust. But even she was afraid of kindness. "You have your mother's eyes," she whispered once, before turning away like the words had burned her tongue. I lived most of my youth chained to obedience. My body belonged to them, but my mind was the only thing they couldn't whip into silence. Every time Pike struck me, I told myself, remember this. Every lash, every insult, every bone-deep bruise. I gathered them like dry wood waiting for a spark. When I was 18, they hung Thomas, my closest friend, from the oak tree near the cotton field. He had tried to run. They caught him by the river and brought him back with his ankles torn by dogs. I watched Pike make a spectacle of it, called all of us to stand and witness as Thomas choked on the rope. The master said it was a lesson, but all I learned that day was how hatred could feel holy when it was born from grief. That tree, that same oak became a part of me. Every time I walked past it, I could still hear the creak of the rope and smell the iron in the air. It was the tree that watched me grow, watched me bleed, and one day it would watch me reclaim everything it had taken from me. Years passed, and I became stronger, quieter, more dangerous. They thought they had broken me, but pain doesn't always destroy, it shapes. I learned to listen, to footsteps, to wind, to silence. I learned patience, because patience is the only weapon a man can sharpen in secret. Sometimes, I dreamed of freedom, of a small cabin by the river where no one shouted my name in anger. I dreamed of planting something that wasn't soaked in sorrow. But dreams are dangerous things on a plantation. They make you forget your place. So I buried mine deep, under the same soil that had buried Thomas. Still, something inside me kept whispering, not yet, but soon. One night, while cleaning the barn, I saw something small, but enough to set fate in motion. Pike had left his whip hanging by the door. It was the same whip that had split my back open more times than I could count. I reached out to touch it. The handle was smooth, worn from years of cruelty, and in that touch, I felt something awaken. That was the night I realized the same hands that once trembled under fear could one day command it, and the same tree that had tasted my blood might one day drink his. The older I grew, the deeper my silence became. I learned to keep my face still, My voice calm, my eyes lowered. On a plantation like Caldwell's, silence was survival. But inside me, something was changing, slowly, like iron heating in a hidden forge. The days were cruel, and the nights were crueler. When the sun set, Pike would walk through the quarters with his lantern, the flame flickering like a demon's eye. His boots crunched on the dirt, and every sound made hearts stop. Sometimes he dragged someone out just to hear them scream, to remind the rest of us who held the power. The women trembled when his shadow appeared. The men looked away, helpless. We all carried our shame like a second skin. One winter, a fever swept through the plantation. The overseer said it was God's way of thinning the weak. We buried 10 souls in the cold mud before the month was done. The ground was so hard, we had to break it with picks before lowering the bodies in. I dug graves until my hands bled, and Pike still whipped me for being too slow. He said, "Pain builds muscle, boy. You should be thanking me." That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the door of the quarters, watching the fog roll over the fields. My back was torn open, and every breath felt like fire. But worse than the pain was the sound of laughter drifting from the big house. The master and his guests were feasting, celebrating the harvest. The same harvest we bled for. They drank wine while we drank rainwater. They laughed while we buried our dead. There was one night I can never forget. The master came back from Little Rock with a new carriage, shining and black as midnight. He wanted it clean by dawn, and Pike made sure I was the one to do it. The cold bit into my skin as I worked under the lantern light. Pike stood there, watching, chewing tobacco. "Faster," he barked. I kept polishing the wheel. "Didn't you hear me, boy?" I nodded, but he wanted words. "Yes, sir," I muttered. That was when he struck me, right across the face with his cane. I fell to my knees, and blood filled my mouth. He laughed. "Maybe I should teach you manners," he said, and kicked me in the ribs. I tried to crawl away, but his boot pressed on my neck. He bent close and whispered, "Your mama screamed just like you." The world went quiet. For a second, even the night stopped breathing. He spat beside me, then walked away, leaving me broken in the dirt. That night, I went to the oak tree, the same one where Thomas had been hanged. The moonlight slid across its bark like silver scars. I pressed my hand against it and whispered, "I ain't afraid no more." My voice shook, but I meant it. Every man has a breaking point. Mine came the next morning when Pike whipped a boy named Elias, just 12 years old, for dropping a water bucket. The whip tore through his back like fire through dry leaves. The child screamed, and Pike laughed. Something inside me cracked. I stepped forward without thinking. "Stop," I said. Just one word. The whole field froze. Pike turned, whip still in his hand. "What did you say?" "Stop," I said again, louder this time. He stared at me like I'd gone mad. Then he smiled. "You must want to die, Nathaniel." Maybe I did. Maybe part of me already had. He swung the whip, and I caught it midair. The leather burned my palm, but I didn't let go. I stared into his eyes, eyes that had mocked pain for years, and I saw something I'd never seen before. Fear. He stumbled back, but before he could speak, the master's voice called from the porch. "Nathaniel, to the post." The crowd went silent. Pike grinned again, blood at the corner of his lip. He thought I'd be broken again, but he didn't see what I saw in my mind. The tree, the rope, the ghosts of all who'd suffered before me. They were whispering now. Not words, but the sound of chains rattling in rhythm with my heartbeat. And in that rhythm, I began to plan. The revenge wasn't born in one night. It grew, slow and steady, fed by humiliation, cruelty, and silence. Every task they gave me, I obeyed, but I was watching. I knew when Pike drank himself senseless, when the master left his window unlatched, when the guards grew careless during church hours. I memorized their weaknesses like verses from the Bible. I didn't know when I would strike, only that I would. And when I did, it would be on the same ground where my brother fell. The day the wind changed, even the birds knew something was coming. The sky hung heavy over the fields, low and gray, pressing against the earth like a secret about to be told. That morning, I was ordered to carry feed to the stables. The air smelt of rain and old sweat, and my back ached from the lash Pike had given me 2 nights before. But my mind was sharper than it had ever been. I had waited too long for a sign, and now it came. Pike had been drinking more since the fever took his wife in the spring. His hands shook when he tried to light his pipe, and his words slurred into nonsense. The master didn't notice. He was too busy preparing for the annual harvest feast, a night when the white folk gathered to boast, drink, and make their slaves dance like puppets. Every year it was the same: the smell of roasted pig, the sound of fiddles, and the laughter that turned cruel when the whiskey flowed. But this year, I wasn't planning to dance. That afternoon, I overheard something I wasn't supposed to. While brushing the master's horse near the porch, I heard him talking to Pike. He said, "After the feast, we are selling 3 of the men, Nathaniel included. Too much trouble. He's got that look in his eye." I froze. Every muscle in my body went cold. Sold. The word hit me harder than any whip. Sold meant torn away from everything I'd ever known, from the graves of those I loved, from the tree where my past was buried. It meant starting again under another man's cruelty, or dying in a wagon before I got there. That night, as the sun bled out behind the trees, I went to the oak again. The wind hissed through its branches like whispers of the dead. I knelt beside its roots and dug with my bare hands until the earth turned to mud. There, I found what I had buried years ago, a rusted nail, bent and black. It was all that was left from the collar that once chained my neck. I held it in my palm and whispered, "If I die tomorrow, I die free." The next day was the harvest feast. The big house shimmered with candlelight, the smell of roasted meat spilling into the air. Laughter and music danced through the windows while we, the enslaved, stood outside waiting to serve. I was assigned to pour wine. Pike was already drunk, his voice loud and mean. The master wore his best coat, white as snow, with a gold watch hanging from his vest. When I stepped inside, all the memories of pain seemed to breathe through the walls. I saw Mistress Evelyn watching me quietly from her chair. Her eyes were tired, sad. Maybe she saw something in mine too, something she couldn't name. At midnight, when the guests stumbled outside for air, I slipped away into the barn. The storm had finally come, rain hammering the roof in angry rhythm. My heart beat like a drum in my chest. I took Pike's whip from its hook, the same whip that had carved my back 100 times. Its leather was slick and heavy in my hand. I could hear Pike's laughter echoing from the porch. The master was beside him, clapping him on the back, proud as a king beside his fool. That's when I saw it, the oak tree standing tall at the edge of the field, rain streaking down its trunk like tears. The same tree where Thomas had died. The same tree where I had promised vengeance. I knew then that the time had come. Every slave dreams of freedom, but not all freedom comes from running. Some comes from facing the devil where he lives. I walked back into the house, soaked to the bone, carrying the whip in my hand. Pike saw me first and laughed. "Boy, what you doing with that?" My voice was calm. "You dropped it." The master turned to look, his smile fading as he saw my face. There was no fear left in me, only the weight of everything I'd endured. And before either of them could move, I said softly, "It's time to dance." The thunder outside rolled like drums in a funeral march. What happened next would turn the night into legend. The storm outside roared like the voice of every soul that had ever suffered beneath that roof. Lightning ripped across the sky, and for a moment the world turned white, every shadow stripped bare. I stood there, soaked, trembling, but not from fear. For the first time in my life, I was trembling from power. Pike staggered toward me, half drunk, grinning. "Put that whip down, boy," he said, voice slurred, pointing at me with a bottle. "You think you're a man now?" I didn't answer. My silence frightened him more than words could. The master rose from his chair, slow and cautious. "Nathaniel," he said, his tone measured, "whatever you're thinking, don't." I looked at him, his fine coat, his soft hands, his polished boots, and I remembered every lash that came from his orders. every cry that echoed through those fields, every grave we had dug for his prophet. And I whispered, "It's already done." Before he could take another breath, I swung the whip. The crack split the air like thunder. Pike screamed, stumbling back, his cheek slashed open. He reached for his pistol, but I struck again. The leather bit into his wrist, sending the gun skidding across the floor. "Pick it up," I said to the master. "Pick it up so I can see you bleed like me." He didn't move. His eyes darted to the door, but I stepped between him and freedom. Rain hammered against the windows. The candles flickered, casting wild shadows on the walls. The smell of smoke and wet earth seeped into the house. The whip dripped red now, Pike's blood mixing with rainwater. I dragged Pike by the collar out into the storm. He cursed and spat, but the thunder drowned his voice. The master followed, shouting my name, but I didn't hear him. My mind was somewhere else, years back, standing in this same field, watching Thomas choke at the end of a rope. The oak tree loomed ahead, dark against the lightning. Its branches swayed like arms reaching for justice. "This is where it ends," I said. Pike stumbled, fell to his knees. "Please, Nathaniel, don't." "Please?" I repeated, my voice hollow. "You ever said that word when I begged you to stop?" He looked up, eyes wild, face streaked with blood and rain. "I was just doing my job." I raised the whip. "So am I." The crack echoed through the night. Twice. Again. Every strike was a year of pain. Every scream was a ghost set free. The storm swallowed the sound, but I kept swinging until my arms went numb and my chest burned with rage. The master tried to run. I turned, catching him by the coat. "No," I said, dragging him forward. "You're not watching from the porch tonight." He fought me, but I was stronger now, stronger than every beating, every scar, every chain they had ever laid on me. I threw him against the tree, pressing the whip's handle under his throat. "This tree remembers," I said through my teeth. "It remembers every man who died here." He gasped for air, clawing at the bark. Lightning flashed again, showing his face twisted in terror. For once, I saw him not as a master, but as a man, weak, afraid, small. "You said I had the devil in me," I whispered. "Maybe you were right." I swung. The whip cracked, tearing through his coat, then his flesh. He screamed, a sound that tore the sky apart. I hit him again, and again, until the tree was painted red with his sin. The rain kept falling. The wind screamed through the branches like the voices of the dead. When it was done, I stepped back, chest heaving, hands trembling. The whip dangled from my fingers, heavy with blood and water. Pike lay motionless at the roots of the tree. The master slumped forward, barely breathing, his gold watch glinting faintly in the mud. I looked up at the sky. The clouds broke for a moment, and moonlight spilled through, cold and silver, falling on the tree that had seen both my suffering and my justice. The whip slipped from my hand. The storm had washed away the blood, but not the memory. That would never fade. For the first time in my life, I felt something close to freedom, not peace, not joy, but release. I turned toward the fields. Smoke rose in the distance. Someone had knocked over a lantern in the quarters. The fire spread fast, gold against the night. The house of Caldwell was burning, and as the flames reached the sky, I walked away, barefoot, leaving behind the chains that once named me. When the dawn finally broke, the world was gray and quiet again. The storm had passed, leaving behind a field of ruin. Smoke curled lazily above the charred remains of the big house, its white pillars blackened and cracked. The air smelled of ash, wet wood, and blood. The oak tree stood untouched amid it all, ancient and still, as if nothing on earth could shake its roots. I stood there barefoot, the mud cool beneath my feet, my shirt clinging to my skin. The whip lay at the base of the tree like an offering. The master's gold watch hung from one of the branches, swinging softly in the morning breeze, ticking faintly, marking the seconds since his empire fell. For a long while, I didn't move. I just listened to the birds returning, to the slow dripping of rainwater from the leaves, to the silence of men who would never speak again. My hands trembled, not from fear this time, but from the weight of what I had done. I had taken a life, too, perhaps, and yet the world did not end. The sun rose as it always did, indifferent to justice or sin. In the distance, I heard cries from the quarters. The others were waking, confused, afraid. They didn't know what had happened in the night. Some thought the fire had come from heaven. Others whispered the name, Nathaniel, like it was both a prayer and a warning. I didn't go to them. I couldn't. My place wasn't there anymore. The man who had lived among them, the obedient, beaten, silent man, had died under that tree along with the master and Pike. What stood in his place now was something new, something untamed. I walked toward the river, following the path Thomas once took when he tried to run. The sun glinted off the water, wide and shining, stretching out like freedom itself. I knelt at its edge and washed my hands, but the red didn't seem to fade. It wasn't blood anymore. It was memory. For 3 days, I hid in the woods, surviving on berries and rainwater. At night, I dreamed of the whip cracking, of the master's scream, of the fire swallowing the house. But I also dreamed of my mother, her face I'd never seen, standing beneath the magnolia trees, smiling, saying, "You did what we could not." On the fourth day, I found an abandoned cabin deep in the swamp. Its roof sagged, and the walls were green with moss, but to me, it was a palace. I lit a small fire and sat in its warmth, the first comfort I had ever owned. For weeks, I stayed hidden, listening to the news carried by travelers and whispers in the dark. They said the Caldwell plantation had burned to the ground. The overseer and master were found dead, their bodies marked with strange wounds, as if struck by God himself. The county men searched for the runaway slave named Nathaniel, offering a bounty higher than they ever had before. But no one found me. I learned to move like the wind, quiet, unseen, free. Sometimes I ventured close enough to the river to see my reflection. The scars on my back had healed into hard lines, each one a chapter of a story no one would ever write. I didn't run north. I didn't cross into free land. My freedom was here, in the same earth that had once enslaved me. I built my life out of the ashes of theirs. I fished, trapped, planted corn. The days were silent, but peace grows best in silence. And yet, at night, when the wind rustled through the trees, I could still hear the creak of that oak. Not accusing, not vengeful, just remembering. Like it, I could not forget. One evening, years later, I returned to the field. The land had changed. Grass grew where chains once clinked. The tree still stood, tall and scarred. I touched its bark and felt the heartbeat of every soul it had witnessed. "I kept my promise," I whispered, "and I paid the debt." The wind carried my words through the branches, and for the first time, the place felt holy again, not cursed, not haunted, but cleansed. Then I turned away from the tree and never looked back. I have lived many years since that night. The world changed its face. New men came, new names ruled the land, and they called it progress. But no law, no paper, no preacher ever told the truth of what freedom really costs. Freedom is not born in speeches. It's carved from the flesh of those who refuse to kneel any longer. Sometimes, when I sit by the river and listen to the wind, I think of that boy I used to be, the one who trembled when he heard boots on the porch, who prayed to a silent sky for mercy that never came. That boy is buried now, under the roots of the oak, but he still whispers through me when the nights turn cold. People say time heals all wounds, but that's a lie made by those who never had to wear them. Time doesn't heal. It teaches you how to carry pain quietly, like an old song only your heart remembers the words to. There are mornings when I wake before sunrise and feel the air thick with dew, and I swear I can still smell the cotton fields. Wet, heavy, endless. I can hear the soft hum of the others singing through their sorrow, the voices rising together in a kind of broken beauty. We sang not to forget our chains, but to remind ourselves that somewhere inside us, something was still whole. I remember Mistress Evelyn's face in the firelight that last night. She didn't scream. She didn't run. She just watched. Maybe she understood. Maybe she knew that everything her husband built was balanced on our backs, and that one day, the weight of it had to crush him. I never hated her, not truly. She was another prisoner in a different cage. Sometimes I wonder what people said about me after I vanished. Did they call me a murderer? A madman? Or a ghost that rose from the fields to punish the wicked? Perhaps they built stories around my name, turned me into a warning whispered to children in the dark. I don't mind. A warning is better than being forgotten. At night, when the moon lays its pale hand on the water, I speak to the dead. Not in madness, but in memory. I speak to Thomas, to my mother, to every man and woman who died nameless in the soil of Arkansas. I tell them, we were not beasts. We were not shadows. We were men and women who felt, who dreamed, who loved. And in those moments, the wind shifts, gentle and kind, and I like to believe they hear me. The tree still stands where it always did. They say trees have memory, and I believe it. That oak holds every cry, every prayer, every heartbeat that ever echoed beneath its branches. I sometimes imagine travelers passing by it now, never knowing what roots it drinks from, what ghosts hum in its shade. Maybe one day, someone will sit beneath it and feel something, something they can't explain. And maybe that will be enough. Freedom, I have learned, is not just the absence of chains. It is the right to remember on your own terms, to speak your name without flinching, to walk past the tree of your pain and keep walking. I no longer fear the night. The dark that once held my torment now carries my peace. When I close my eyes, I see the storm again, the lightning, the whip, the fire, but I also see dawn breaking over the river. I see the color of the sky when it forgives itself for rain. Before I die, I will carve my story into the trunk of that oak, not for pity, not for fame, but because the world forgets too easily, and trees never do. It will say, "Here stood Nathaniel, born in chains, died a free man. He returned the whip to the hands that made it bleed. And on this very tree, pain became justice." When the wind blows through those branches, it will carry my voice with it, soft, steady, unbroken. And somewhere beyond the horizon, where no man calls another his master, I will finally rest.